Most people picture Family Guy as a loud show. Cutaways, yelling, a giant chicken crashing through a wall. The story underneath the noise is much quieter. A young animator from Rhode Island. A cancellation nobody expected. A resurrection nobody planned for. A dog who keeps trying to write a novel. A baby who never grows up. And a house on Spooner Street that has held 24 seasons inside it without ever really changing shape. So the first episode of Family Guy aired on January 31st, 1999. It aired in the same time slot directly after the Super Bowl, and Fox had been looking for a new animated comedy to pair with The Simpsons, which was already a decade old at this point and a global institution. The network had tried other animated shows before, most of them forgettable, a few of them actively bad. They wanted something that could sit next to The Simpsons and not feel like a knockoff. They handed the slot to a 25-year-old animator from Rhode Island named Seth MacFarlane. MacFarlane had been working on a series of short films at the Rhode Island School of Design. His graduation project, called The Life of Larry, featured a middle-aged man with a thick New England accent who sat on a couch and made observations about his life. The project impressed the right people at Hanna-Barbera, and they invited him to develop it further. A second short, Larry and Steve, expanded the concept. In it, a dim but well-meaning man adopted a talking dog from a shelter. The dog, voiced by MacFarlane, was intelligent, sarcastic, and drank martinis. The man was not. The short was rough, the animation was limited, and the voice of what would become Brian was already audibly present. The pilot episode, which again aired after the Super Bowl before an enormous captive audience, had to establish everything. It had 7 minutes to introduce a family of 6, a town full of eccentrics, and a tone that had never been quite attempted before on primetime television. The title was Death Has a Shadow. MacFarlane wrote it, Pete Michels directed it. Or is it Pete Mitchells? I actually don't really know. The plot on paper is simple. Peter gets fired from his job at the toy factory for drinking too much at a stag party the night before. He can't tell Lois he lost his job, he signs up for welfare, the welfare check arrives enormous. Peter, flush with cash, lavishes his family with gifts. When the welfare office realizes the mistake, Peter is arrested for fraud. Stewie, in a parallel subplot, builds his mind control device from his crib, and the episode ends with Peter standing trial, Lois testifying for him, and Stewie having his device removed by Lois in a casual act of maternal intervention that completely undoes an infant's elaborate scheme. So me sitting here and telling you that plot summary basically explains to you nothing about what the episode actually feels like. Just to explain to you the dynamic of Peter and Lois in the first 40 seconds, the episode opens up on a close-up of a television. A broadcast about the dangers of alcohol narrated in a flat educational tone. Camera pulls back, Peter's on the couch holding a beer, watching the broadcast with a look of mild, pleasant interest. He doesn't really get the irony. Lois walks in and asks Peter if he learned anything about the program. Peter repeats a garbled version of what he just heard, and Lois sighs. Boom. Dynamic established. In 40 seconds. From there, the episode moves through a series of scenes that feel, even now, 25 years later, like the show is announcing its operating system. Peter and his friends at the stag party playing a game that involves guessing what object is hidden in a paper bag. The bag holds a mousetrap, Peter puts his hand in, and he screams. The joke is one of the oldest in television history. MacFarlane makes it work by timing the scream precisely 1.5 beats after Peter's hand enters the bag. Yes, I have too much time on my hands to actually count the beats. Too early though, and it reads as a standard gag. Too late, and it loses the surprise. That specific 1.5 beat delay is the MacFarlane rhythm that'll carry the show for the next 2 decades. You see it the first time, you don't really think much of it, but you see it over 25 fracking years, and it gets hard not to notice. Stewie's first scene is in the nursery. Lois walks in, cooing at him. Stewie waits until she leaves, then he looks at the camera and delivers in a crisp British accent the line that would become his signature introduction to the world. Cursed ovarian Bastille. The idea that an infant could speak like a Bond villain was, in 1999, genuinely inventive. The joke has been copied so many times since then that it's hard to feel how fresh it was the very first time it was heard. The contrast between the pastel nursery and the Napoleonic vocabulary was the character's engine. Stewie in the pilot is not yet the character he will become, he is purely villainous. His mind control device is not a toy, it's a weapon. He intends to use it to escape the Griffin household and take over the world. The device works on everyone except Lois, and Lois removes it off screen, casually, while giving Stewie a bath. The device never gets mentioned again. When the show revisits Stewie's character in later seasons and softens him up, the pilot will stand as a curious artifact of what almost was. Peter's trial is the emotional climax here. He's accused of fraud. The courtroom is full of the show's supporting cast, most of whom have no lines but are already visibly present in their final designs. Cleveland, Quagmire, Joe. The judge asks if anyone will speak on Peter's behalf, and Lois stands. She tells the court, in a speech that MacFarlane wrote with more care than the rest of the episode, that Peter is not a bad man. He is the man who made a mistake because he was afraid of disappointing her. She says that his heart is in the right place, and she says simply that she loves him. The jury acquits him, and the Griffin family go home. That speech is the loud, bearing, emotional moment of the episode, obviously, and it does something that the show will spend the next 24 years almost never doing again. It states the family's love for each other directly, without irony, without a cutaway, without a punchline undercutting it. The speech is not subtle, it's not complex. It's a sitcom wife testifying in defense of her sitcom husband. But the show has, in the decades that follow, spent so much time burying its sincerity under layers of irony and gore and cutaway gags that the pilot now reads as unusually naked. MacFarlane at 25 still believed a cartoon family could say I love you and mean it. The pilot was, by the standards of a primetime debut, a success. The Super Bowl lead-in gave it an audience of 22 million viewers, and Fox ordered the rest of the season within a week. The production team, working out of a small office in Los Angeles, began writing and storyboarding the next 6 episodes at a pace that would horrify any modern animation studio. 7 episodes had to be ready for broadcast within 3 months, and the team, led by MacFarlane and a handful of writers he had recruited from college and from the Rhode Island animation scene, worked through nights for weeks on end. Family Guy, in its first year, was a show being assembled by people who were barely sleeping. MacFarlane's original pitch for the show, the one he had taken to Fox executives a year earlier, contained something the pilot hints at but does not fully commit to. His vision had 2 layers. The family sitcom was the surface. Under it, MacFarlane wanted the side characters, the non-sequitur gags, and the plot detours to carry running commentary on American culture. The Simpsons had been doing a version of that since 1989, but MacFarlane's version was faster, louder, and less interested in resolving anything. In The Simpsons, a gag usually connected to the plot, or at least sat close enough to the plot that it didn't feel like a detour. In Family Guy, the detour was the point, or at least it certainly felt like it. The pilot contains an early version of the cutaway format. At one point during the stag party scene, Peter tells a story about a previous job he held at a church. The scene cuts without transition to Peter getting dressed as a priest, delivering a sermon. The sermon goes wrong, the scene cuts back, the whole thing lasts about 12 frackin' seconds, dude. It is not yet the formalized structure the show will develop later, where a character says some version of, "This is worse than the time that," and the screen fades to white and the audience is somewhere else entirely. But the seed is there, right? The show, from its very first episode, was already learning how to leave itself. The response from critics was mixed. Some reviewers praised the show's visual inventiveness and the freshness of MacFarlane's voice. Others dismissed it as a Simpsons clone with a meaner streak. The comparison to The Simpsons would follow Family Guy for years, partially because Fox scheduled the 2 shows back-to-back on Sunday nights, and partially because the basic premise of an animated family sitcom was, in 1999, unavoidably Simpson-shaped. MacFarlane himself has said in interviews that he knew the comparison was coming and that he tried in the early seasons to push the show's tone into territory The Simpsons would never go. The Stewie character was one move in that direction. The willingness to let a joke go completely off the rails and then simply stop without resolving it was another. And the third was the show's refusal to let any character learn from anything from one episode to the next. These days, The Simpsons kind of does that too. But like, Peter could get fired, arrested, tried, acquitted, and returned home, and the next episode to open as if none of that ever happened. The Simpsons, even at its most absurd, maintained a thin narrative continuity, for the most part. Family Guy, from the beginning, rejected the idea that continuity mattered at all, until a few episodes didn't, but I mean, that's the exception, not the rule. But the rejection was not yet complete. Across the first 3 seasons, the show would continue to build episodes around real emotional stakes in ways that seem, looking back, almost innocent. The pilot's courtroom speech, the one where Lois says she loves Peter without any irony, wasn't a fluke. It was the baseline. The show, before the cancellation, before the resurrection, before the cutaway format hardened into the show's primary grammar, was something gentler. It was a comedy about a strange family in a strange town, and the strangeness was the point, but the family, at its core, still loved each other. That will not last. But at least for the first 7 episodes of the first season, it was true. By the way, if you're still watching and you're enjoying what you're watching, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. It's completely free. I say this now and not at the end because we got a lot ahead of us, guys. And we're both going to be different people by the end of this video. So, anyway, the show had to figure out the family it was actually building, right? And that version is stranger than most people remember. The first 3 seasons of Family Guy ran from January 1999 to February 2002. Across those 30 episodes, the show built a version of itself that is now almost unrecognizable to viewers who only know the later years. The pacing was slower, the cutaways were present but not dominant, the character designs were slightly different, rougher around the edges, the colors flatter, the line work less precise. MacFarlane was still learning to voice the characters. Peter's voice in the early episodes sits in a slightly higher register. Stewie's British accent is more clipped, less theatrical. Brian sounds younger. The show in its first 2 years is a show finding its voice in real time, on air, in front of millions of viewers. The character who changed most dramatically in this era was definitely Stewie. The Stewie of the pilot was a one-note villain. The Stewie of Season 1 episodes 2 through 7 began to develop a more complex relationship with the world around him. In Chitty Chitty Death Bang, the second episode of the series, Stewie attempts to kill Lois with a series of increasingly elaborate traps. Lois survives every single one. Stewie's frustration becomes the joke. His evil is real inside the cartoon logic, but yeah, the comedy comes from the failure. Here's the vocabulary of a dictator and the practical limitations of an actual baby. In Mind Over Murder, the fourth episode, Stewie begins to develop the thing that will define his character for the rest of the run. He starts to play. The episode gives him a play date with another baby, and Stewie, forced into the position of having to interact with someone of his own physical age, discovers that being a baby is, in its own way, not entirely without pleasure. The baby is not a supervillain, the baby's just a frackin' baby. Stewie, for the first time, is confronted with the possibility that being a baby might have some appeal beyond world domination. He doesn't commit to the idea, he still wants to destroy his mother, but the door is open now. The character has been given an actual second dimension. By the end of Season 1, the dynamic between Peter and Lois has settled into a reliable rhythm. Peter does something stupid, Lois gets angry, Peter apologizes partially and incompetently. Lois forgives him because the alternative is that the family falls apart. Alex Borstein, the voice of Lois, has said in interviews that she played Lois as a woman who genuinely loves her husband, even though she is aware on some level that she could have done better. The joke of their marriage isn't that Lois is trapped, it's that she chose this and she keeps choosing it, and the choosing is the part Peter never seems to notice. Peter's friends, established in the pilot and developed across the first season, are the three men who will sit at the bar with him in almost every single episode going forward. Cleveland Brown, a soft-spoken man with a gentle voice and a slow delivery. Glenn Quagmire, a sex-obsessed pilot who lives next door and whose catchphrase "giggity" would become one of the most quoted lines in the show's history. And Joe Swanson, a police officer confined to a wheelchair who compensates for his physical limitations with aggressive, almost desperate enthusiasm for violence. They meet at a bar called the Drunken Clam, a name so juvenile and so specific that you can feel the writers enjoying it. The bar scenes are the show's quietest innovation. Most sitcoms, animated or otherwise, have a location where the characters gather to talk about the plot. The Simpsons has Moe's Tavern, Cheers had the bar, Friends had the coffee shop, and the Drunken Clam serves as the same structural function, but the tone is definitely different. On Friends, the conversation is about the characters' relationships. At Moe's, the conversation is about whatever Homer has done wrong this week. At the Drunken Clam, the conversation is not about anything in particular. The characters talk past each other. Peter says something stupid, Quagmire says something inappropriate, Cleveland corrects both of them gently and is promptly ignored. Joe tries to steer the conversation towards something resembling a normal human interaction and fails repeatedly. The bar scenes are not about the plot, they're about the sound of four men who have known each other so long that nobody is listening to anyone else. The audience is invited to be the fifth person at the table, which means the audience is also not listening. Season 1 ended on May 16, 1999, with the 7th episode, Brian Portrait of a Dog. The plot of this one involves Brian entering a dog show, being humiliated, and running away from home. The episode does something Season 1 rarely did. It asks the audience to take Brian seriously as a character. Brian, sitting on a park bench after his humiliation, delivers a monologue about what it feels like to be a dog who can think and speak and write novels, but who is, to the rest of the world, just a dog. Seth MacFarlane, voicing the character he had been drawing since college, gave the speech a weight that the rest of the episode didn't quite earn. The dog asking to be seen as a person is a joke that Family Guy will return to across its entire run, sometimes playing it for comedy, sometimes playing it a little straighter, never fully committing to either reading. Season 2 began in September 1999, 4 months after the first season ended. The gap was short, which means the writers did not have a lot of time to overthink anything. The second season is the one where the show figured out what its actual strengths were. The episodes became more confident. The cutaways, still not yet the dominant format, became more elaborate, the animation improved, and the voice cast settled into their roles. Peter's voice dropped into the register it would keep for the next 20 years. Stewie began experimenting with the theatrical, exaggerated delivery that fans would eventually quote back at him. And yeah, basically, at this point, you can see the show starting to run instead of walk. The highlight of Season 2, and one of the most important episodes in my opinion in the show's history, is the 8th one, titled Road to Rhode Island. The title is a joke, a reference to the old Bob Hope and Bing Crosby Road to movies from the 1940s. The premise is that Brian and Stewie, for the first time in the show's history, are forced to spend an extended period of time together. They miss their flight home from California, and they have to drive across the country, in the car, with nothing to do but talk. They discover that they are, unexpectedly, the two characters in the show who see the world most clearly. The episode works because Brian and Stewie are by design the two characters who do not quite belong. Brian is a dog who thinks he's a person, Stewie's a baby who thinks he's a king. Both of them are trapped inside bodies that definitely do not match their self-image.
The car ride gives them space to talk about it. Stewie admits in one scene that he's afraid of being left alone. Brian, in another scene, admits that he's afraid of never being taken seriously. The episode doesn't resolve either fear, it just lets the two characters sit in the same car and acknowledge for a few minutes that they are each other's only real company. The Road to Rhode Island format would become, over the course of the show's run, a reoccurring event. The show would produce 10 more Road 2 episodes across subsequent seasons, and every one of them follows the same exact structure. Brian and Stewie, separated from the rest of the family, go on an adventure. They sing a song together, they argue, they make up. By the end of the episode, their relationship has shifted slightly. None of the other characters notice. The show, for these episodes, allows itself to actually be serialized. The Road 2 episodes are the closest Family Guy comes to a genuine character arc, and the fans who have tracked the show across the decades know to watch out for them. The other episode from Season 2 worth sitting with is the 20th episode, Wasted Talent. Peter wins a tour of the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, the factory where he works. He drinks so much beer on the tour that he loses the ability to walk normally, and a local talent scout watching him stumble mistakes his drunken limp for a new dance move. Peter becomes a tap dancing sensation. The episode is not on paper one of the show's most ambitious, but it does contain a single scene that fans have been quoting for over 20 years now. Peter, lying on the couch watching a commercial for his own tap dancing show, realizes that the commercial contains a phone number for ticket sales. He stares at the screen, and the number is 1-800-something. Peter, with the slow dawning certainty of a man who has just solved a complex mathematical problem, announces that somebody is out of luck because he's just taken the last of the tickets. He thinks the commercial is selling tickets in real time, so he thinks he has to call in to reserve them. Nobody in the room corrects him. That scene is the platonic ideal of a Peter Griffin joke. Homer Simpson usually lacks basic information, but Peter Griffin lives in a slightly different version of reality. The commercial is not selling tickets, it's never been selling tickets. The number on the screen is not a number anyone's supposed to call. Peter's watched television his entire life and has still not learned how commercials work. The joke is Peter's certainty. He's wrong, but he's wrong with the confidence of a man who believes that he has solved television. Season 2 ended in June 2000. Season 3 began in November of that very same year. The gap was short again, which was normal for an animated show that required months of lead time to produce each episode. The third season is, by the agreement of most fans, the strongest stretch of the pre-cancellation era. The writers had fully internalized the show's rhythms, the animators had reached the peak of the early production style, the characters felt lived in, the jokes landed with the confidence that earlier episodes had sometimes lacked, and the defining episode of Season 3, in my opinion, one of the most often cited as the best of the pre-cancellation run, is the 22nd episode, Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows. The episode aired on January 17th, 2002, and the plot splits into two stories. In the first, Brian is assigned community service and ends up caring for an elderly shut-in named Pearl, a former opera singer who has not left her house in 30 years. In the second story, Peter grows a mustache and a family of endangered swallows nests inside it. He becomes, entirely by accident, a conservation hero. The Brian plot is the serious one. Pearl, voiced by the real opera singer Lee Merriweather, is a character the show treats with unexpected gentleness. She's bitter, she's lonely, she's been alone for so long that she's forgotten how to speak to anyone at a normal human volume. Relatable. Brian, who is himself bitter and lonely and has been for years, recognizes something in her that he doesn't want to admit he also feels. The episode ends with Pearl briefly finding the courage to leave her house and sing in public one last time. The performance isn't triumphant in the way a normal cartoon would make it. It's small, it's sad and beautiful. And the show does not undercut it with a joke. It's it. Brian sits in the audience and watches, and the episode for a moment lets him be quiet. The Peter plot line is the joke plot, and it's one of the show's best, actually. The image of Peter Griffin, a large man with a thick beard made entirely of endangered birds walking throughout Quahog being hailed as a wildlife hero, is played with full commitment. The birds nest in his face, he can't shave, he can't eat normally. At one point, an interviewer asks him how he feels about being the last hope of an endangered species. Peter, with the bird still perched on his chin, says he feels like a mother. The joke lands because the delivery is completely sincere. He means it. Peter's always meant it, whatever he's saying. And that is the thing about him that the show keeps circling back to. He is, underneath his stupidity, almost pathologically sincere. The problem is not that he doesn't care. The problem is that he cares about the wrong things, in the wrong order, and with an intensity that makes everything worse. Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music and Lyrics. It was the first major award the show had ever received. The win didn't really change anything, though. The show was already in trouble. Family Guy by the start of 2002 was losing the battle for its time slot. Fox kept moving the show around the schedule, trying to find a night where it could hold an audience. The show aired on Thursdays for a while, then Sundays, then Thursdays again. But you bet your bottom dollar every move cost the show viewers. The ratings dropped, the network, which had already been uncertain about the show's long-term viability, began to pull back its investment. The writing was on the wall. McFarlane knew the show was in danger. The writers knew, the animators knew, kept drawing. That didn't let that stop them, because the drawing was what they were paid to do. On February 14th, 2002, the third season of Family Guy aired its final episode. The episode was called Family Guy Viewer Mail Number 1, and it was a clip show in the format of letters from viewers asking the show to fulfill specific wishes. The final segment of the episode involved the Griffin family, each in turn gaining superpowers. It was funny, strange, slightly desperate. The way a show's final episode is always slightly desperate, though, because the people making it are trying to say goodbye without being allowed to say goodbye. 2 weeks later, Fox officially canceled Family Guy. The announcement was small, a few sentences and a press release. The show, after 3 seasons and 30 episodes, was officially over. Nobody in 2002 would have predicted what happened next, though, as the show, by every reasonable metric, was dead. But over the next 3 years, something rare took shape. A canceled show without airing a single new episode became one of the most popular animated series in the country. The cancellation of an animated show is, in the normal order of things, a quiet event. The network stops ordering episodes, the production staff finds other jobs, the voice actors move on to other projects, if they're lucky. The show, if it was good, develops a small cult following over the next decade, though. That following grows slowly, through DVD sales and late-night reruns and word of mouth. The show never comes back. Nobody expects it to come back. The television industry is not by design arranged to resurrect canceled shows. Family Guy did something that almost no canceled show had ever done. It got bigger after it was gone. And the mechanism was Adult Swim, the late-night programming block on Cartoon Network. In 2003, Adult Swim was a relatively new venture. Cartoon Network had launched the block in September of 2001, aimed at teenagers and young adults who had grown up on cartoons and were now looking for something a little stranger, a little darker, a little more willing to be weird, I guess. The block's early hits included Aqua Teen Hunger Force, a show about a box of fries, a milkshake, and a meatball who lived in New Jersey and solved crimes. So yeah, based off of that, you can tell the show was pretty bizarre and brilliant and had no clear genre category. Adult Swim, by programming it, was signaling that their version of late-night TV was going to be unlike anything else on the dial. The executives at Cartoon Network, looking for cheap content to fill the Adult Swim schedule, made an offer for the syndication rights to Family Guy. The show had been canceled for over a year, the price was low. 50 episodes, counting the episodes Fox had never aired, were available, and Cartoon Network swooped them up. On April 20th of 2003, Adult Swim began airing Family Guy reruns at 11:30 at night, Monday through Thursday. The time slot was the one the network used for its strongest shows. The placement was a vote of confidence. The audience almost immediately responded. College students, Adult Swim's target audience, discovered Family Guy in reruns and treated it as a new show. The jokes that had aired to modest ratings on Sunday nights, the jokes buried by Fox's constant schedule changes, suddenly had viewers watching without distraction. The audience was young, loud, and online. The internet in 2003 was definitely not what it would become by 2010, but forums and message boards were already shaping cult TV as we would know it today. Well, not today, because TV is kind of dead, but as it was when it was in its prime. Anyway, Family Guy, rerun after rerun, became the subject of thousands of posts. Lines were quoted, clips were shared. The show, dead in 2002, was suddenly one of the most discussed animated series in the country. The DVD sales confirmed what the ratings were showing. The first 2 seasons of Family Guy, released on DVD in April and September of 2003, sold over 1 million copies each within the first few months of their release. These numbers, for a canceled show with no new episodes, were unprecedented. The Simpsons, the most popular animated series in history, it sold well on DVD, but had never come close to 1 million copies in a single year. Family Guy, dead to rights, was suddenly outselling the show that had once been considered its inferior imitator. Fox executives, watching from the sidelines, began to have conversations. The conversations went something like this. The show we canceled is now one of the most top-selling animated DVDs in the country. The show we canceled is now one of the most popular programs on Adult Swim. The show we canceled is being quoted in college classrooms and internet forums and late-night conversations between people who barely watch broadcast television. We might have made a mistake. Against every normal rule of network TV, the dead show was now worth more than the live one had been. The man who had the most to lose from this conversation staying quiet was, of course, Seth MacFarlane. He had moved on in the years after the cancellation to other projects. He had voiced characters in other animated shows, he had taken meetings about other pilots, he had begun quietly to build the career that would eventually make him one of the most powerful people in television. The resurrection of Family Guy was not in 2003 a sure thing. MacFarlane had leverage and he knew it, and he used it carefully. In 2004, Fox approached MacFarlane about reviving Family Guy. The conversation, which both sides later described as cordial, was not about whether the show should come back. The conversation was about how many episodes Fox was willing to commit to. A normal season order for an animated show was 13 episodes, with the option to extend to 22. MacFarlane asked for 35, and after some negotiation, Fox agreed. The announcement came in March of 2004. Family Guy would return for a 4th season. The first episode would air in May of 2005. The show, against all odds and against every precedent in the history of network TV, had been reanimated. MacFarlane, in interviews around the time of the announcement, was careful to frame the return as a second chance. He said the show would be smarter, said the writers understood the characters better now, said the years away had given everyone time to think about what the show could become. He didn't say what the fans already knew, which is that the return was also a victory lap. The network that had canceled Family Guy was now paying to bring it back. The power dynamic between creator and network had shifted permanently. MacFarlane was 29 years old, and he had just won an argument with one of the largest TV networks in the world. The episode that announced the return, and the one that fans still cite as the definitive statement of the show's new era, was called North by North Quahog. It aired on May 1st of 2005, and it was the first new episode of Family Guy in 3 years. The opening scene is one of the most famous in the show's history. Peter walks into the kitchen, looks at Lois. He says in a flat, casual tone that the show has been canceled. He says it was a shame, but the ratings were bad and the network lost faith. He says the show might make another appearance, the DVD sales are good enough, and shrugs. The scene holds, then the entire Griffin family standing in the kitchen turns to face the camera. Peter lists every show that Fox had tried to launch in the 3 years since Family Guy had been canceled, and the list is long. The list is very specific. The list includes shows that nobody in the audience remembers because nobody in the audience watched them. Peter names every single one. He names the ones that were canceled after 2 episodes, he names the ones that were canceled after 1, he names the ones that never even made it to air. The list keeps going, and the delivery is just calm. It's precise. It's utterly devastating. Then Peter looks directly into the camera. He says in the same flat tone that if all those shows had succeeded, they probably wouldn't be standing here right now. He thanks the audience for buying the DVDs. He says, quote, "Let's get to the jokes." The opening credits roll, and the rest is history. This is the show that 3 years after its own death is telling the network that killed it that they were wrong. The bit's not subtle, it's not disguise, it's Seth MacFarlane standing in the kitchen of his own creation, thanking the audience for saving it and telling Fox to go to hell. The episode that followed was not the best episode of Family Guy, it wasn't even the best episode of that season, but the opening scene was the statement the show needed to make. We are back. You couldn't kill us, the couch is still here, the TV's still on, let's frackin' go, man. The rest of the episode is a parody of the Alfred Hitchcock film North by Northwest. Peter and Lois go on a second honeymoon. Peter impersonates Mel Gibson, and adventure follows. The episode is fun, but not essential. The important thing, the thing that mattered to the audience, was that the show had announced its own return in its own voice, and the voice had not changed. Family Guy was still Family Guy. The cancellation had not softened it. The time away had not made it careful. The show came back louder, angrier, and more willing to burn down its own network in the first 60 seconds of its first episode than it had ever been before it left. The 4th season, produced under this new arrangement, ran for 30 episodes. The writers, freed from the anxiety of cancellation, began to experiment. The cutaway format, which had been present but not dominant in its first 3 seasons, began to take over. Episodes would open on a normal sitcom plot, Peter would make a reference, the screen would fade to white, and the audience would be somewhere else for 20 seconds, watching a joke that had nothing to do with the rest of the episode. The rhythm became faster, the references became denser. The show, which had once been a family sitcom with occasional detours, was now a detour machine with occasional family sitcom moments. Some fans loved the new rhythm, some fans missed the old one, and the argument between the two camps, which began in season 4 and has continued ever since, is whether the pre-cancellation version of the show was better. The argument is unresolved because the question assumes the two versions were trying to do the same thing. They were not. The pre-cancellation show was trying to survive on a network that did not trust it. The post-cancellation show was trying to prove that the network had been wrong, and that the audience who had kept it alive in the wilderness was smart enough to follow wherever it wanted to go. The post-cancellation show had permission to stop auditioning for an audience that already had one. The DVD sales had proven it. The Adult Swim ratings had proven it. The only thing left to prove was that the show, now that it had its audience's attention, could do whatever it wanted with it. That is a dangerous gift to give to a writer's room. Over the next 15 seasons, Family Guy tested the limits of that gift, pushing further into taboo, absurdism, and comedy that did not care whether you were offended, shocked, or simply confused. The show had been canceled, and it came back, and it learned in the wilderness that the audience would follow it almost anywhere. The post-cancellation show came back faster and angrier. At the same time, it kept developing the one relationship the early show had only discovered by accident. The first Road 2 episode aired on April 18th, 2000. It was the 8th episode of Season 2. As discussed, the title, Road to Rhode Island, was a reference to the old Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road movies from the 1940s, a joke that almost nobody in the target demographic understood. But the writers did it anyway. Family Guy has always been a show that makes references the audience is not expected to get all the time, because the writers just find it funny and the audience, weirdly, has always been willing to catch up. The premise was simple. Brian has to travel to California to pick up Stewie, who's been staying with his grandparents. They missed their flight home. They had to drive across the country together. Two characters who had barely shared a scene before Season 2 found themselves locked in a car for 22 minutes of screen time, and something unexpected happened. They just worked. The episode is not, by the standards of later Road 2 specials, particularly elaborate. The animation was still early era, the songs are short, the central set piece is a trip to a motel where Brian tries to flirt with a woman at the front desk and Stewie from the car heckles him through the window, but anyway, something in the rhythm of the conversation between these two characters felt different from anything else the show had done previously. Brian the dog, who wants to be a person, talks to Stewie the way he talks to adults. Stewie the baby, who wants to be a king, talks to Brian the way he talks to no one else. Neither of them is performing for the other. The car, for the first time in the show's history, is a room where two characters are not pretending. Seth MacFarlane said in DVD commentaries and interviews that he didn't plan the Brian and Stewie dynamic, it just kinda happened. The first Road 2 episode was scheduled because the writers needed to pair up the characters who had not been paired up before, and the chemistry was discovered, not designed. Obviously, MacFarlane voices both characters, which means the Road 2 episodes are, on a technical level, one man talking to himself for 22 minutes. He's joked about this before, of course. I mean, the joke is funny. The thing underneath the joke is that MacFarlane voicing both sides of the conversation created the only relationship on the show that actually develops across seasons. The second Road 2 episode, Road to Europe, aired on December 10th, 2001 as the 20th episode of Season 3. It was the last pre-cancellation Road 2. The premise this time was that Stewie, obsessed with a British children's show called Jolly Farm Revue, stows away on a plane to England. Brian follows him, they end up in Europe, they sing a duet, they argue, they come home. Voila. The episode is looser than the first, more confident, the writers having realized that the format was not a one-off experiment, but an actual reliable engine. The episode contains a scene that fans of the show still reference. Brian and Stewie, standing in the middle of a European street, sing a song called You Have to Believe in Something, and the song is a duet about the nature of belief. Stewie believes in world domination, Brian believes in nothing. They sing it anyway. The scene on paper is absolutely absurd, an infant and a dog singing a philosophy duet in an empty street, but the show commits to it completely. The animation is careful, the harmonies are close, the scene ends, as all Road 2 duets end, with the two of them walking off together, still singing, into the next scene. Road to Rupert, the third Road 2, aired on November 13th, 2003, is part of Season 5. It was the first Road 2 of the post-cancellation era, and the premise involves Stewie's teddy bear Rupert being sold at a yard sale by accident. Stewie, devastated, demands that Brian help him get Rupert back. The episode tracks them across the country, chasing a yard sale teddy bear throughout a series of increasingly improbable situations. There's a moment in Road to Rupert that the show has never quite replicated. Stewie, sitting in the passenger seat of Brian's car holding Rupert after the bear has been recovered, looks at Brian and says quietly that he does not know what he would do without Rupert. Brian does not make a joke, the scene does not cut away. The moment, which lasts about 6 seconds, is one of the only times in the entire run of the show that a character's emotional vulnerability is treated as the thing itself and not set up as the punchline. The show acknowledges in that 6-second window that Stewie's attachment to Rupert is very real, and that Brian knows it's real, and that the audience knows Brian knows, and that nobody needs to say anything else. The scene moves on. The show does not linger, but the 6 seconds are there, and they are the reason the Road 2 episodes feel different from anything else the show makes. Road to Germany, the fourth entry, aired on September 26, 2005 as part of Season 7. The premise is Stewie's time machine. Mort Goldman, the nervous pharmacist who's been a supporting character since Season 1, accidentally activates the machine and gets sent back to Nazi Germany. Brian and Stewie follow him. The episode's a war comedy, tonally strange, full of time travel logic the show does not bother to explain because the show has never cared to explain just about anything. The center of the episode, again, is Brian and Stewie navigating a hostile world together. The relationship by now has a rhythm. Stewie is the idea person, Brian is the skeptic who goes along anyway. The dynamic is not new in Season 7, the show has been building it for 5 years at this point, and here, the audience knows what a Road to episode is before the title card even appears. Road to the Multiverse, from the Season 8 premiere on September 23, 2006, is the most ambitious Road to the show has ever attempted. The premise is that Stewie has built a device that can travel between parallel universes. He and Brian spend the episode jumping from one universe to another, and each universe is animated in a different style. A Disney universe with the characters drawn as classic hand-drawn animation, a live-action universe, a universe where everyone's drawn as a crude flipbook, a universe where the characters are puppets. The episode was very technically difficult, as you can imagine from just those 3 examples, and there's many more. Every universe required a different animation team, a different design language, a different set of rules. The production schedule was brutal, so thankfully it won awards for its animation direction. The emotional center of Road to the Multiverse is a single scene in a universe where everyone is disabled. Joe Swanson in this one is the only able-bodied person in Quahog. The scene is brief, the joke is dark, but the episode uses it to make a point the show rarely makes explicitly. The life Brian and Stewie have, the universe they come from, is not inherently better or worse than any other version. The only thing that makes it matter is that it's theirs. The episode, for all its visual invention, is about 2 characters looking at infinite versions of their own lives and deciding, without saying it, that the version they are in is the one that they want. Road to the North Pole, the Christmas Road to, aired on November 15, 2007 as part of Season 9. The premise involves Santa Claus, a mall Santa, a trip to the actual North Pole, and a version of Santa who is dying from the stress of his own job. The episode is darker than any previous Road to. The North Pole is not magical. The North Pole is an industrial complex where elves work in terrible conditions and Santa is slowly killing himself to meet demand. Brian and Stewie, confronted with an institution that they thought was simple, discover that nothing is simple. The episode ends with them returning home, shaken, having done nothing to fix what they saw. The tone of the Road to the North Pole episode is a departure from the Road to format. Earlier Road to episodes ended with the duo returning home, their bond slightly deepened. Not this one. I mean, yeah, it ends with them returning home, their bond intact, but their understanding of the world is certainly damaged. Season 11, Episode 21's Road to Vegas, that aired in February of 2009, is the Road to where the duo has fully internalized their own dynamic. The episode involves a cloning machine, a trip to Las Vegas, and a series of jokes about probability and identity. The episode is, by the standards of the Road to canon, not the strongest entry. The plot is thin, the set pieces are smaller than Multiverse or North Pole, but the conversations between Brian and Stewie in this episode are looser, more comfortable, more lived in. The characters have been doing this for a whole frackin' decade now, I'd sure hope so. They're past the point where they needed to discover each other, they're now unambiguously a team. Road to India, the later era entry from Season 14 in February 2012, is the last Road to worth examining in detail. The premise this time is, of course, a trip to India, Brian falling in love, and Stewie competing for Brian's attention. The episode reverses the usual dynamic. Stewie, in earlier Road 2s, is the one who drags Brian into adventures. Brian's the reluctant participant. In Road to India, Brian's the one who wants something, and Stewie's the one along for the ride. The episode's about the fear that the other person will outgrow you. It's a childish fear, and the show knows it's childish, and Stewie the baby is the one who feels it. The episode does not resolve the fear, it just names it. All these episodes, taken together, form a counter-argument to the rest of the show. Family Guy, everywhere else, insists that nothing matters. Peter's injuries heal between scenes, Meg's trauma resets every Sunday, Brian's novels are never finished, Quagmire's arrests never lead to actual consequences or convictions. The show, as a formal system, is built on the refusal of consequence. The Road 2 episodes are the only place where consequence exists. Brian and Stewie's relationship, tracked across 10 episodes in 12 years, changes. Stewie becomes less villainous, Brian becomes more emotionally available, sometimes. And the changes are small, they're almost invisible episode to episode, but across a whole decade, the accumulated weight is certainly real. The episode that proves this, the episode that is not a Road 2, but is the spiritual center of everything the Road 2 episodes are building toward, is called Brian and Stewie, from Season 8, Episode 17, which aired on January 29th, 2007. It is a bottle episode. The entire episode takes place inside a bank vault. Brian and Stewie, for reasons the show barely bothers to explain, are locked inside. They cannot get out until morning. The episode is 22 minutes long and there are no cutaways, no other characters, no B-plot. There's just the dog and the baby in a locked room, talking. The episode is, by any measure, the most emotionally direct thing Family Guy has ever produced. Stewie, at one point, soils his diaper. Brian has to change it. The scene's not played for gross-out humor. It's just played straight. The most unsettling word possible for a cartoon about a talking dog and a British infant. Stewie's humiliated. Brian, who has the opportunity to mock him and does not take it, changes the diaper without saying anything, and the scene is... it's quiet. It's long. The scene in the context of a show that has spent 8 seasons building its identity around the refusal of sincerity is shocking. Later on in the episode, Brian admits that he keeps a gun in his safe deposit box because he has at various points in his life considered suicide. The admission is not a joke. Stewie, for once, does not have a cutting reply. He just listens. The show, for a few minutes, allows its two most cartoonish characters to talk about something real. And it does not undercut the moment with a cutaway or a punchline or a reference to 1980s television. The episode stands alone in the Family Guy catalog. Nothing before it attempted this tone. Nothing after it would ever attempt it again. McFarlane, who wrote the episode, has described it in interviews as an experiment. He wanted to see whether the characters could carry a full episode with no gags, no cutaways, no family, no town. The answer, as the episode makes clear, is that, yeah, they most definitely could. Brian and Stewie, stripped of every distraction, revealed themselves to be the two characters the show actually cared about. The dog who wants to be a person, the baby who wants to be an adult, both trapped in bodies that will never match their sense of self. Both alone in a town that does not see them. Both, in the end, sitting in a bank vault, waiting for morning. The road 2 episodes and Brian and Stewie together form the quiet argument at the center of Family Guy. The show on its surface is about Peter, Peter's misadventures, Peter's injuries, Peter's inability to learn, but the show, in its most carefully made episodes, is about the dog and the baby, the two characters who see Quahog from the outside, the two characters who know something is strange about the world they live in, but cannot leave it, because leaving it would mean leaving each other. Family Guy, across 24 seasons, has never stated this argument directly. It has simply, every couple of years, put Brian and Stewie in a car and just let them talk. The Brian and Stewie relationship is only half of the show's structural argument. The other half is the device that controls the pacing, the tone, of the emotional rhythm of every episode that is not a bottle episode in a bank vault. The cutaway gag is the closest thing Family Guy has to a signature. The structure is so consistent it can be described in a single sentence. A character says some version of, "This is worse than that time that," and the screen fades to white. Scene plays out. Somewhere else happens, usually 5 to 30 seconds long, often completely unrelated to what was actually happening before. Screen fades back. Character finishes the thought, does not finish it, and the scene continues as if nothing happened. The device is so familiar now that after decades of use, it's easy to forget how radical it was when the show first committed to it. In the first 3 seasons, the cutaway was present but restrained. The pilot, Death Has a Shadow, contains a singular, clear example. Peter, at a stag party, tells a story about a previous job at a church. Screen cuts to Peter dressed as a priest, delivering a sermon. Sermon goes badly, screen cuts back. Whole thing lasts roughly 12 seconds. It's a joke, not a format. The early seasons used cutaways the way most comedies use flashbacks, as occasional punctuation, never as the primary grammar. Is grammar the right word to use there? I don't know, you know what I mean. The transition is measurable. Season 1 episodes average about 4 cutaways per 22-minute episode. Season 4 episodes average closer to 12. The change was not accidental. When the show returned from cancellation in 2005, the writers' room had 3 years of material they had been saving up. 3 years of jokes that had nowhere to go. 3 years of pop culture references that had accumulated while the show was dead. The cutaway format gave them a place to put all of it. Any stray thought, any impression, any riff on a current event that could be turned into a 12-second scene, dropped into an episode, and the audience would accept it. The format, which had started as punctuation, became the language. There we go. The show was aware of its own dependence on this device. In Season 4, Episode 17, The Fat Guy Strangler, there's a scene where Peter, sitting on the couch, explains to Lois that the show's jokes are generated by manatees. The screen cuts to a tank, and inside the tank, manatees are swimming. They are pushing plastic balls into tubes, and each ball has a word on it, and the manatees, by pushing random combinations of balls, are generating Family Guy cutaways. The joke is very self-aware without being apologetic. The show is telling the audience that it knows the audience thinks the jokes are random. It's agreeing with them. The manatees swimming in their own tank, pushing their word balls at the writers. The joke is that the writers are not offended by the accusations. Randomness, the show is arguing, is a valid method. You try generating 300 jokes a week for 20 years and see if your method looks any different. The Conway Twitty bits are the extreme version of this argument. Beginning in Season 4, the show would occasionally cut mid-scene to a full-length clip of the country singer Conway Twitty performing on an old variety show. The first Twitty clip appeared as a joke about how long the show could hold a cutaway without the audience revolting. The clip was not abbreviated, it was not edited for time, it was in some cases over 3 minutes long. 3 minutes in a 22-minute episode, that is a noticeable chunk of runtime. The show burned it on a country singer from the 1970s. The audience initially was confused. Some viewers changed the channel. The ones who stayed, though, the ones who understood the game, were rewarded with the knowledge that they had just watched the show burn 12% of its own runtime on a bit whose entire point was that it had no point. The chicken fights are cutaways that escaped the cutaway format and became their own institution. The first fight between Peter and the giant chicken happened in Da Boom, Season 2, Episode 3, on February 14th, 2000. Peter, walking through the ruins of a post-apocalyptic Quahog, passes the chicken on the street. The chicken gives him an expired coupon. Peter is offended. They fight. The fight is long, elaborate, and the best scene of the episode. Peter and the chicken destroy buildings. They crash through windows, fall off bridges. The fight is paced like a feckin' action movie. It has moves, choreography, dramatic pauses. At the end of the fight, Peter wins somehow. The chicken walks away somehow. Neither of them mentions it ever again. No television writer in 2000 watching that scene would have predicted that the chicken would come back, though. The second fight appeared in season 10. The third fight, years later, expanded the sequence to include additional characters and locations, each fight more elaborate somehow than the last. The chicken fights are, in a sense, the logical endpoint of the cutaway format. The show leaves the room, it does not come back for like fracking 6 minutes, and by the time it returns, the scene it left has been forgotten and a new scene has begun, leaving the audience to having to reconstruct what was happening before the chicken even appeared. The cutaway in these moments is not a joke inside the episode. The cutaway is kind of just the whole fracking episode. The chicken fight is the A-plot, the thing it interrupted. Whatever Peter was doing before the chicken appeared is irrelevant.
This is the formal argument that Family Guy makes about its own structure. The cutaway is not filler, it's the method by which the show releases emotional tension before it can accumulate. A normal sitcom builds toward emotional moments. The build-up creates pressure. The release is the punchline or the hug or the speech where someone says, "I love you." Family Guy doesn't want that kind of pressure, dude. The show, after the pilot's courtroom speech, has spent the rest of its frackin' run avoiding emotional build-up of any kind. The cutaway is the value. When a scene starts to feel meaningful, when the stakes start to feel real, the screen fades to white and the audience is somewhere else watching a manatee push a word ball into a tube, laughing at something that has no connection to anything, really. The rhythm this creates is unusual and, for a sleep video, useful. A normal episode of Family Guy does not ask the audience to stay emotionally engaged, it asks the audience to float. The cutaway gags with their rhythmic fade to white and fade black create a pattern of attention and release that accidentally mirrors drifting towards sleep. A joke lands, the brain processes it, the screen fades. The brain, for a moment, has like nothing to hold on to, right? Then the screen returns and the plot's moved on, and the brain can either catch up or let go. And if it's like mine, it's gonna let go 9 times out of 10. The show does not punish either choice, really. The cutaway is also the show's primary method of argument. When Peter says, "This is worse than that time that," and the screen cuts to a scene of Peter in a previous situation that was demonstrably worse than whatever is happening right now, the show is making a claim, right? Peter's present situation can be understood through comparison to his past. The comparison's almost always absurd. The past situation's ridiculous. The claim is never serious. Still, the structure is thesis followed by evidence, which is how arguments work in the real world. Big shocker there. Family Guy, a show about a man who cannot think, is built around a device that thinks for him. The cutaway is Peter's reasoning. It's the only reasoning he has. The show has experimented with variations on the format. There are call-forward gags where the cutaway claims to show the future. There are fake advertisement gags where the cutaway becomes a commercial for a product that does not exist. There are sustained cutaways where the show leaves the A-plot and then keeps it leaving it, stacking cutaway inside cutaway until the audience has forgotten how many layers deep they are. The writers refer to these as Russian nesting cutaways. The show has done them a handful of times, always in later seasons, always as a way of testing whether the format can fold in on itself without collapsing. So far, it hasn't collapsed, I think. The manatee joke, the Conway Twitty sequences, the chicken fights, the nesting cutaways, all of them are the same argument stated in different registers. Family Guy does not believe in the traditional rules of narrative structure. It believes in the sound of 4 men at a bar talking past each other. It believes in the rhythm of a joke, a fade, a silence, a return. It believes that the audience, given enough time and enough episodes, will learn to find meaning in the pattern itself, not in what the pattern contains. If you're keeping up with me so far, guys, if you're still watching, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel a lot. It's completely free. And I'm probably going to say that at least 20 more times before this video is over because I'm slowly going insane. The cutaway format, for all its cleverness, is also a way of avoiding something, which raises the question the show has spent 2 decades answering without ever asking: what does Family Guy actually believe about the line between a joke and a wound? Here's the argument Family Guy has been making since season 1. Offense without a fixed target is the only honest comedy. The show does not punch up, doesn't punch down, it just punches in every direction. Because choosing a direction would mean taking a side, right? And taking a side would mean caring about something, and caring about something would mean the cutaway has failed to do its job. Equal opportunity offense is not a philosophy Family Guy arrived at through careful thought. It is the logical endpoint of a show that built a pressure release valve into every scene and then kept building it. That argument is easier to defend in theory than in practice. The most direct test of the show's limits was Partial Terms of Endearment, an episode from Season 8 that Fox refused to broadcast. The episode, which aired on March 2nd, 2007, when it eventually did, was about abortion. Lois, at the request of an old college friend, agrees to be a surrogate mother. The pregnancy progresses, the friend and her husband die in a car accident, and Lois is left carrying a child that nobody was expecting to have to care for. The episode itself is not the show's best work. The abortion debate is handled with the subtlety of a fracking brick. Peter in one scene compares abortion to returning a library book. Stewie in another scene imagines what his life would have been like if Lois had chosen differently about him. The episode makes the standard arguments on both sides in the show's standard voice, which is to say the arguments are presented as punchlines. The episode does not take a position. It presents the debate as impossible because both sides are impossible. Purely because Family Guy does not believe in anything. It is not equipped to make a decision. The Fox refusal made this episode famous. The network, by refusing to air the episode, confirmed what the show has been arguing since its return. There are limits. The limits are arbitrary. The show exists to test them. Again, not to necessarily pick one side or the other, because it can't. It just exists to push boundaries. The character of Glenn Quagmire is the show's longest-running test of its own theory. Quagmire, voiced, of course, by Seth MacFarlane, is a sex offender. I mean, the dude keeps women chained in his basement. I feel like sex offenders putting it mildly, but anyway. He also drugs their drinks. He has sex with unconscious partners. The show, for the first decade of its freckin' run, presented this as comedy. Quagmire's catchphrase, giggity, became one of the most quoted lines in the show's history. The dissonance, the gap between what Quagmire does and how the show presents it, is the most uncomfortable thing about watching old Family Guy episodes these days, in my opinion. The show was not unaware of the dissonance, it simply didn't care. In later seasons, the show began to complicate the character of Quagmire. Episodes like Quagmire's mom from season 14 gave him a backstory that explained, without excusing, his behavior. His father, Dan Quagmire, transitioned to become a woman named Ida. Quagmire's relationship with his father became one of the show's more surprising emotional arcs. The character did not become a good person. The show did not pretend he had. But the show, by acknowledging the character's history, began to treat him less as a running gag and more as a person. This is the show's theory of offense made visible. Present the damage long enough, and eventually you have to look at it. Peter's violence, by contrast, has never been complicated. Peter frickin' hits people. He hits Meg, he hits Chris, he fights strangers, he punches a pregnant woman in one episode, he's been shot, run over, buried, drowned, crushed, electrocuted, and dismembered. And I'm not envying you if you're sleeping right now with all those words that I just said. Don't dream about that. Dream about puppies. Anyway, point is, he's always fine by the next scene. Alright, the show's relationship to Peter's violence is the purest expression of its philosophy about consequence. There are none. Family Guy operates in the universe where physical harm does not matter because physical harm is reset at the scene break. The violence isn't real. The show knows it's not real. The audience knows it's not real. The only question is whether the joke is funny or not. Meg Griffin is a character who tests this theory the hardest, in my opinion. Meg, the Griffin's teenage daughter, has been the show's punching bag since the very first season, and you know this information if you know even just a little bit about Family Guy as a whole. She's ignored, mocked, told repeatedly that nobody in the family loves her. The show has done entire episodes about how little her family cares about her. Shut up, Meg, Peter's simplest and most repeated dismissal, became a cultural catchphrase. The joke, according to the writers, is that Meg is a normal teenager in a family of monsters. The joke, according to the fans, who have written thousands of words about it, is that the show hates women. The joke, according to the show, is that the family is terrible. Meg is the one who notices, and the noticing is funny. Mila Kunis, who's voiced Meg since season 2, said in interviews that she finds the character's treatment funny. She's also said that she occasionally reads scripts and thinks, that is a lot of Meg abuse for one episode. The writers, she has noted, never seem to run out of new ways to make Meg's life even worse. The episode where the family built a panic room and locks Meg out is called The Griffin Family History from season 4. Peter, Lois, Chris, Brian, and Stewie cram into the panic room. Meg is left outside. A burglar enters the house. Meg fights him off alone. And the family, watching on the security monitor, roots for the burglar. The joke lands if you read it as absurdism. It lands differently if you read it as cruelty. The show's treatment of religion, politics, and race operates on similar principles. Peter briefly converts to Judaism in season 4's When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. The episode was blocked by Fox for years before airing on Adult Swim. The joke, according to MacFarlane, was not about Judaism. The joke was about Peter's inability to understand anything, including religion. The network did not buy the argument. The episode aired anyway. The sky did not fall. The show has made jokes about every American president since its debut. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump especially, Joe Biden. The jokes are always the same structure. The president, whoever he is, does something foolish. Peter comments on it. The show moves on. The politics of Family Guy are not partisan. They are nihilist. Every institution corrupt. Every politician incompetent. Every system a joke. The show does not offer an alternative either. It doesn't believe in alternatives. It believes that the best response to a broken world is laughter. Seth MacFarlane's public statement about comedy has been consistent across the decades. He believes that the purpose of comedy is to test limits. He believes that offense is the price of free expression. He believes that a joke, however cruel, is still a joke, and that the audience is capable of distinguishing between a cartoon and a political statement. He's defended the show's most controversial moments with the same argument every time. The show is equal opportunity. The show mocks everyone. The show does not take sides. The counter-argument, which critics of the show have been making for like fracking 20 years, is that equal opportunity offense is a trick. Or offense. I've been saying both at the same time. I mean the same thing. Punching up and punching down are not the same thing. The argument goes from pretending they are identical as a way of avoiding the responsibility of choosing targets carefully. A joke about a sitting president is different from a joke about a domestic violence victim. The show, by treating both jokes as structurally identical, is making a claim about equivalence that many viewers reject, and many viewers don't simply care to read into all that much, honestly. The show does not respond to this criticism directly, it responds indirectly. In the moments where it lets its characters be sincere, Peter and Lois in the episodes where the writers remember they were married are genuinely devoted to each other. The episode where Lois briefly considers an affair and Peter discovering this is devastated plays the emotion straight. Brian and Stewie in the bank vault are allowed to be honest without being undercut. The show, in these moments, acknowledges the cruelty is not the only thing it knows how to do. It simply chooses cruelty more often because cruelty is easier and because the audience, after 20 years, has been trained to laugh. The question the show raises without answering the question at the core of its entire approach to comedy is whether a joke that hurts someone is still a joke. Family Guy believes that the answer is yes. The belief is not provisional. It is not hedged. The show has been arguing this position every Sunday night for a quarter century. Man, a quarter century. The argument has not changed. The critics not persuaded. The audience, the millions of people who have kept the show on the air through cancellations and scandals and the slow erosion of broadcast television itself, have voted with its attention. They're still watching. The test of everything the show believes about comedy, about consequence, about what an audience will accept from a cartoon family came in 2013. The show killed Brian at one point. The audience, millions of people who've been trained by Family Guy to believe that nothing mattered, reacted as if something actually did. On November 24th, 2013, Family Guy aired Life of Brian. It was the 6th episode of season 12. And the title sounded like a joke before the episode even began, right? A Monty Python reference attached to the show's most self-serious character. For most of its runtime, the episode behaved like a normal Brian and Stewie story. Stewie destroyed his time machine, Brian helped them. The two of them argued in the ordinary ways that they always did, the way they'd been arguing since Road to Rhode Island. And then Brian was hit by a car. I gotta tell you, I've seen this episode like a fracking million times, and the scene is still strange to watch because Family Guy had spent 14 years teaching its audience that impact did not matter. Peter could fall down the stairs, Peter could fight a giant chicken through a wall, Stewie could be injured, Brian could be thrown, crushed, dragged, or humiliated, and the body would be reset for the next scene. Physical damage in Family Guy was not emotional damage, it was punctuation. Like that one time they killed off Kenny in South Park. Like, actually, Life of Brian treated this car differently. Brian was taken to a veterinary hospital. The family gathered around him. The lighting changed. The jokes slowed down. Peter was not allowed to turn the moment into noise. Lois cried. Stewie stood near the bed and did not have a device that could actually fix it. Brian, the character who had spent the entire series trying to be treated as more than a dog, died as the family dog, surrounded by the people who loved him in the exact way he'd always wanted and always resented. The line that mattered was simple. Brian told them they had given him a wonderful life, and that was it. No elaborate final joke, no cutaway to undercut it, no Peter misunderstanding the word euthanasia. The dog said goodbye, and the show let him say goodbye. Then the episode did something even stranger. It kept going. The Griffins adopted another dog, Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico. I think that's how you say their last name. I apologize. And he was not a bad character. That part matters. Vinny did not fail as a joke, right? He was warm, he was funny and different enough from Brian to feel deliberate. You know, he had a lived-in voice, a little street history and delivery, and he treated Stewie with unexpected gentleness. In a normal animated sitcom, he might have worked. Family Guy was no longer a normal animated sitcom, though. It had become like a memory system. Brian was more than a cast member. He was part of the house. He sat between Peter's stupidity and Stewie's loneliness. He was the sarcastic voice at the kitchen table, the drink on the side table, the unfinished novel, the look across the room that said he understood how ridiculous all this was, and he had chosen to stay anyway. Removing Brian didn't feel like changing a character, it felt like moving the walls. Here's what Brian's death actually revealed. The audience had been paying attention in a direction the show never explicitly asked them to. Every cutaway had trained them to let go, right? Every reset had trained them that nothing stuck. Family Guy had spent 14 whole years at this point teaching its viewers not to care. And the moment it took something away, something that mattered to them, some core part of the show, the audience discovered that they had been caring the whole time, quietly, without permission, in the gaps between the jokes. Truly, you never know what you have until it's gone. The grief was not irrational. It was the return on investment the show had been collecting for years without acknowledging it. The audience response was immediate and bizarrely emotional. Petitions appeared, social media filled with anger. Viewers who had laughed at the show's violence for years reacted as if the show had violated some contract. Of course, that contract had never been written down, but everyone understood it. Family Guy could do almost anything, as long as the family came home at the end of the day. It could offend, it could contradict itself, it could kill people for a joke, but the household had to remain structurally intact. Brian's death exposed the hidden rule of the series. The show was allowed to pretend nothing mattered only because something did matter. The Griffins, as a unit, mattered. The house mattered. The familiar configuration mattered. The family could be cruel, negligent, selfish, and monstrous, but they had to remain recognizable as the family the audience had been returning to for years. 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie found a way back to the time machine. The mechanics were not especially important. Family Guy's never been a show where time travel needs to obey a stable rule book, like Steins Gate. Now that's a good show. Stewie saw his earlier self arrange the right collision of events and saved Brian before the car could hit him. Brian lived. Vinny disappeared from the core cast. The house returned to its proper shape. The emotional point was not that Brian came back. The emotional point was that Stewie brought him back. For years, Brian and Stewie had been the show's real relationship. I mean, we had a whole segment talking about them earlier. I feel like we're still kind of talking about them now. Peter and Lois were the sitcom marriage. Meg and Chris were the kids. Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe were the drinking chorus. Brian and Stewie were the pairing that could hold silence, argument, music, confession, cruelty, and forgiveness all in the same room, dude. When Stewie saved Brian, the show was undoing a plot choice and admitting which bond it could not afford to break. Family Guy had trained its audience to expect the reset button. Then it briefly withheld the reset button and discovered that the audience had been paying more attention than the show sometimes pretended. Brian's death proved the consequence could exist in Quahog, but only as a threat. Brian's return proved the harder truth. The show survives by almost changing, letting the audience feel the shape of loss, and then restoring the house before the damage becomes permanent. Calling that cowardice is too easy. This is the logic of a long-running animated sitcom made visible. The audience does not come back to Family Guy because they want Peter to grow, Lois to leave, Meg to escape, or Stewie to age. They come back because those things do not happen. The comfort's not progress. The comfort's return. Brian died so the show could prove that he could not stay dead. And that's when it sounds cynical. It's also strangely moving, because after Christmas Guy, every Brian and Stewie scene carries a little more weight. Not a lot. Family Guy's not subtle enough or interested enough to build a full emotional arc out of it. But the weight is there. Stewie has lived for a few episodes in a world without Brian. The audience has lived there too. Both decided they did not want that. From that point onward, the show enters a different stage of his life. It's no longer trying to prove that it can survive cancellation. It's no longer trying to prove that it can outrage its critics. It's proven those things. After Brian's death and return, Family Guy is dealing with a stranger problem. What does the show become after it survived everything that was supposed to end it? The Brian death arc revealed the hidden contract. Once that contract was visible, the show could not pretend to be young anymore. Family Guy had become old enough to visit its own first episode, argue with its own early animation, and treat its history as material. The most revealing late period Family Guy episode is not one of the biggest crossovers, and it's not one of the episodes where the show tries to prove it can still offend people. It is a season 10 episode called Back to the Pilot. The premise sounds like a joke the show could have thrown away in 3 minutes. Brian finds a tennis ball in the yard, not a magical object, not a plot device with a mythic weight, a fracking tennis ball, dude. He remembers that there was another ball he buried there years earlier, a better one, because he had peed on it. The date he remembered is January 31st, 1999, the day the pilot aired. Stewie, still in possession of one of his time machines, takes Brian back so we can find it. That's the surface. Doc wants old ball. Baby has time machine. The show uses the excuse to return to its very first episode. What happens when they arrive is much stranger than the setup promises. Brian and Stewie walk into the pilot and immediately start noticing how wrong everything looks. The Griffin house is familiar, but not quite itself. The animation's flatter, characters rougher, Meg's voice is different, Peter's face has that early, slightly melted quality where the design hadn't settled yet. The timing's strange, the family stands still for too long where the show prepares a cutaway. Brian and Stewie, the later versions of the characters, watch the early Family Guy grammar happen in front of them and react to it like viewers who've seen too much. This is harsher than nostalgia. Nostalgia would ask the audience to feel warm about the old days. Back to the Pilot's more surgical than that. It looks at the old version of Family Guy and says, "This was us, and we ain't done yet." The funniest gag in the episode is also the most analytically useful. Brian and Stewie watch early Peter and Lois freeze in the middle of conversation while the episode sets up a cutaway. The modern characters are disturbed. They don't understand why the older characters are standing there like mannequins. Then they realize what's happening. The show is setting up a cutaway in the old style. The machinery is visible because the characters from the future know what the machinery will become. That scene is Family Guy doing criticism of Family Guy inside Family Guy. It is naming its own early awkwardness before anyone else can. It's admitting that the pilot was slower, stranger, less polished, more dependent on obvious setup language. The cutaway, which the earlier sections of this essay have treated as the show's argumentative device, is here treated as an artifact, a fossil, a thing the show used before it learned how to hide the seams. And of course, right? I mean, it was the first episode. Then the episode turns darker because Brian does what Brian always does when given access to moral power. He cannot leave the timeline alone. He remembers 9/11. Standing in 1999, he has information nobody else has. Stewie tells him not to alter the past. Brian argues that if you could stop something terrible, of course you would try to stop it. Steins Gate, he ain't wrong in the abstract. The problem is that Brian's morality is almost always cleaner in theory than in practice. He wants to be the kind of person who saves the world. He also wants to feel like the kind of person who saves the world. Family Guy has always understood that those are not the same. So yeah, Brian changes history. He stops the attacks. The future changes. The consequences do not arrive as a lesson about patriotism or tragedy. They arrive as absurdist historical collapse. George W. Bush does not win re-election. A second civil war breaks out. Nuclear devastation follows. The episode is not making a serious argument that preventing 9/11 would literally cause the apocalypse. It's making a Family Guy argument about causality itself. The past is not a clean machine you can repair with one noble act. It's a mess of pressures, accidents, institutions, resentments, and stupid decisions. Brian thinks he can edit history like a frackin' sentence on a Google Doc. History at its back. Back to the Pilot matters because it treats time travel as the arrogance of revision. Brian wants to improve the past. The show wants to look at the past. Those are different actions. Brian believes intervention is morality. The episode believes memory is more dangerous than that. The craft of the episode reinforces this. The return to the pilot lives in the dialogue and the animation. The older character models are recreated. The staging imitates the first episode. The show asks its animators to reproduce the awkwardness of their own early work, then asks the current characters to move through that awkwardness with modern timing. The visual joke only works because the production team understands its own history well enough to imitate it badly on purpose. There's a real confidence in that. A show has to be old before it can parody its younger self accurately. Too early and the joke is defensive, too late and becomes sentimental. Back to the Pilot hits the middle. It's affectionate, not gentle. It lets the old episode look ugly. It lets the old writing sound stiff. It lets the old Stewie sound like a different creature. Then it keeps on going. Because the point is not to worship the beginning. The point is to measure the distance from it. The point is to laugh at it. See how far they've come. The emotional center is still Brian and Stewie. They're the only characters who can travel backward without dissolving in a pure gag. Peter would turn the pilot into noise. Lois would turn it into a domestic problem. Meg and Chris would barely understand what the frick was going on. Brian and Stewie can stand inside the show's origin and think about it. The dog and the baby once again become the characters through whom Family Guy is able to become self-aware without breaking completely. By the end, after multiple timeline disasters, the past is restored more or less to the place it was supposed to be. The pilot remains the pilot. The tennis ball remains a tennis ball. The family continues. The viewer is still seeing the trick. Family Guy can reset its own history. It can walk into the original episode, damage it, mock it, threaten it, then close the door behind itself. That is the late era show finding a new use for the reset button. In the early years, reset meant Peter could make a mistake and be fine next week. In the revival years, reset meant the show could kill, maim, offend, or contradict itself and continue. And back to the pilot, reset becomes historical. The show can go back to its beginning, look at the raw material, and still come home. The episode also exposes the hidden comfort of long-running animation. A live-action sitcom cannot revisit its pilot this way. Actors age, sets change, bodies betray continuity. Animation can redraw the past. It can place the modern version of a character beside the old one and let both exist in the same frackin' frame. Family Guy uses that power not to produce awe, but to produce a joke about how bad it used to be at cutaways. That joke is doing a lot of work. Because if the show can survive looking directly at its own beginning, it can survive almost frackin' anything. The cancellation, the revival, the backlash, the Brian death arc, the aging audience, the comparison to The Simpsons, the accusation that the show has become lazy. The show has already walked into its own first episode and called itself weird. After that, the only thing left to do is walk into the show it was always accused of copying. The Simpsons guy opens by telling you not to trust crossovers. Before the Griffins reach Springfield, before Peter meets Homer, before Stewie meets Bart, the episode makes a joke about crossover episodes being driven by desperation and marketing. It is the show walking into the room and admitting the criticism before anyone else can. That doesn't make it better per se, but at least it's self-aware. Then once the embarrassment has been acknowledged, it proceeds. The plot gets the Griffins to Springfield through a Family Guy setup. Peter makes an offensive newspaper comic, online outrage builds, the family leaves town until things calm down, their car is stolen, and they end up in the most famous animated town in American television ever, period. Springfield is not introduced as myth, it's introduced as somewhere the Griffins accidentally wake up after driving through the night. That choice matters. Family Guy does not arrive in Springfield with reverence, it arrives like a family that got lost because they did. The first meeting between Homer and Peter is built on recognition. Homer buys the Griffins donuts, Peter likes them. Two fat animated fathers whose bodies are written as engines of appetite and mistake understand each other immediately at the level of stomach. The episode lets them bond with the simplest possible object, a donut. The craft problem is enormous. The episode has to put two animation languages in the same frame. And if you know anything about The Simpsons, you know how many rules those guys have about color and lines and like everything design-wise about The Simpsons characters. It feels foreign, like looking at the designs of The Simpsons and the designs of the Family Guys. Family Guy is flatter, faster, more jagged, more dependent on interruption. The Simpsons' whole different lingo. The episode does not try to merge the styles either. It lets the Griffins look slightly wrong in Springfield. And I love that. Their roundness and whiteness stand out against the yellow world, and the joke is visual before it becomes verbal. The Griffins are visitors to another town in another grammar of animation. The courtroom sequence turns the entire crossover into a disguised copyright argument. Duff Beer and Pawtucket Patriot Ale are placed against each other. The question becomes whether one is an imitation of the other. Basically what everyone's been saying about Family Guy to The Simpsons. And like everyone watching understands that. That's the real joke. The episode does not deny the resemblance. Denial would be useless. Instead, it dramatizes the argument, lets the character stand inside it. And what's funny is that Fred Flintstone is the judge. And he's like, brother, both of y'all copied me. It's not even like The Simpsons is like innocent here. No, the real question is whether similarity means theft, influence, parody, evolution, or something messier. By letting Peter fight Homer in the language of a chicken fight, two men crashing through Springfield escalating the violence far past any reasonable endpoint, the episode makes its strongest argument without stating it. Family Guy may have started in the shadow of The Simpsons, but by season 13, it had developed enough formal habits of its own that it could carry those habits into Springfield and make the older show bend around them. 3 seasons later, Emmy-winning episode makes the reputation problem even more explicit. Peter is angry that Family Guy has been on TV since 1999 and still has not won the major Emmy recognition he thinks it deserves. The Griffin decided to make an Emmy-winning episode by copying prestige television, Modern Family, Girls, Transparent, Homeland, Breaking Bad. The episode becomes a parade of costumes. The best-running joke is that every attempt at prestige makes Family Guy worse. When it imitates a modern single-camera comedy, the dialogue becomes obvious and mannered. When it turns toward drama, it borrows the visual language of grim prestige shows, quiet rooms, cancer diagnoses, distant sound, a family collapsing under tasteful misery. Family Guy can reproduce the language, the lingo. Recognition is not transformation. Putting Peter inside prestige grammar does not turn Family Guy into prestige television. It turns prestige television into another cutaway. Emmy-winning episode is a confession. The show wants to be honored. I mean, who doesn't? It also knows that part of itself that wants honor is ridiculous. The episode says, yes, we know what wins awards. We can copy the moves. We can make some of them work for 30 seconds. If we did that honestly, we would stop being the thing people came here to watch. The two episodes together form a trial. The Simpsons guy addresses the oldest accusation, you are a copy. Emmy-winning episode addresses the later insult, you are not serious enough to matter. In both cases, the verdict is mixed because the show is guilty of some of what it is accused of. It is derivative in places, it is crude, it does want validation, it does use offense as a shortcut, offense, whatever the fuck. It does repeat itself, but it also knows all that. Self-awareness is not innocence. A joke about being desperate does not make a desperate crossover not desperate. Still, awareness changes the texture. Family Guy is not an oblivious machine at this stage. It is a machine that can hear its own gears grinding and make fun of it. Reputation is external. The harder question is whether the show can look inward without turning the inwardness into another gag. Send in Stewie, Please is one of the strangest episodes Family Guy has ever aired. Season 16, episode 12, the premise is tiny. Stewie has been sent to a child psychologist after an incident at school. He enters the office, he talks, the therapist listens. That's the episode. No Peter plot, no Brian Martini, no Griffin living room, no cutaway machine, Carrie in the audience somewhere else every time the room gets uncomfortable. For a show that's built its identity around refusing to stay in the room, this is a radical constraint. The first thing Stewie does is perform. He walks in, fills the silence immediately, just like me in an awkward conversation with silence in it. He comments on the receptionist, the coffee, the office, the child with cancer who left before him. He name drops reality TV, judges the therapist's tastes, reads class markers, and tries to seize control before the session has even begun. In a normal episode, Stewie's monologues are part of the noise. Here, with no cutaway to release pressure, every sentence begins to sound like cover. You know what I mean? Dr. Pritchfield does something most Family Guy characters can't do. He doesn't chase Stewie's with him. He doesn't try to out-joke him. He keeps bringing the conversation back to the thing Stewie does not want examined. The accent. Stewie's British accent has been a joke since the pilot. The family mostly does not understand him. Brian understands him. The show's never maintained a clean rule because the rule is not the point. The point is the contradiction, right? Stewie's a baby with a voice that belongs to an aging stage actor. The accent tells the audience who he believes he is. Superior, articulate, foreign to his own household, born in the wrong room. In the therapist's office, that old joke becomes an identity crisis. Pritchfield says he can't hear the accent. Stewie's offended because the accent is not decorative to him. It is the architecture of his self-image. If the performance isn't landing, the question underneath becomes unavoidable. Who is Stewie when nobody applauds the voice? The episode's best sequence is Stewie's counterattack. He picks up a photograph from the therapist's desk and begins deducing the entire emotional economy of Pritchfield's life. The younger husband, the expensive-looking shirt spot in an outlet, the hotel in Rio they could not quite afford, the professional salary stretched into a lifestyle meant to impress someone who might be slipping away. The monologue is long, precise, and just mean. The cruelty works because the deductions feel plausible. Stewie has hit something real. In a normal Family Guy structure, that monologue would be the punchline. Stewie would win the exchange, the episode would cut away, and the audience would enjoy the performance. Send in Stewie, Please, though, refuses to let performance be enough. Pritchfield absorbs the attack and continues. The longer the room holds, the more Stewie's superiority starts to look like panic. A bit like Robin Williams and Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. The episode eventually moves toward the secret the show has been circling for years. Stewie's accent may not be a fixed fact of the world. It may be a chosen construction. A voice he built because the alternative was being a baby in a house where nobody took him seriously. The accent is armor, the vocabulary is armor, the villainy was armor too back in the early seasons when he called Lois vile woman and built weapons in the nursery. Send in Stewie, Please asks what the softness has been hiding. This matters because Stewie has always been the show's most artificial character. Peter is an exaggerated sitcom father, Brian's an exaggerated self-loathing writer, Stewie began as pure impossibility, a murderous infant with a British accent and a weapons lab. Then Brian happened, the Road 2 episodes happened, the bank vault happened, Brian died and came back. The baby who wanted to rule the world became the baby who needed one dog to understand him. Send in Stewie, Please asks whether Stewie can be interesting without machines, without time travel, without Brian, without theatrical villainy. Just the voice, just the fear underneath the voice. The show can sit still when it wants to. That ability changes how the rest of the series reads. The cutaways are not there because the writers are incapable of staying with a feeling. They're there because the show chooses not to stay. When Family Guy abandons sincerity for a joke, it's not always because sincerity is unavailable. It's because the show has decided the joke is safer, faster, easier, or more native to its voice. Send in Stewie, please removes that excuse. Stewie, in that therapist's office, is the whole show in miniature. Clever enough to avoid almost anything, not quite clever enough to avoid himself. Family Guy began as appointment television. You either saw it after the Super Bowl in 1999, or you did not. The original run lived inside scarcity. A viewer had to be present when the network allowed the show to exist. That version of television made cancellation feel like death. The DVD era saved Family Guy by changing the show from a broadcast event into an object. A season set could sit on a shelf, a friend could bring it into a dorm room, a viewer could watch episodes in sequence and notice patterns that were harder to see week by week. Fox had canceled a weekly program. The audience resurrected a physical archive. Streaming, though, changed the archive again. Family Guy is no longer a sequence, it is a place. You can start with the pilot or with the Simpsons guy. You can watch Brian die and return in the same sitting. You can jump from Road to Rhode Island to Road to Multiverse to Send in Stewie, please, and see the entire Brian Stewie axis without watching the episodes around it. Completely different seasons, all at the same time, at the tip of your grubby little fingertips. Just like mine. Brother, you can fall asleep somewhere in season 6 and wake up in season 7 with the family still arguing if you're that desperate for sleep. This suits Family Guy better than almost any other animated sitcom because Family Guy was built around re-entry before streaming made re-entry a viewing habit. The cutaway is a re-entry device. A character says a phrase, the show leaves, the show comes back, the viewer learns hundreds of times that absence is temporary. You can be taken somewhere else and still return to the room. That is exactly how streaming viewers use the show. They leave and return. They half watch, they sleep, they look up during a familiar voice and know roughly where they are. Peter is wrong. Lois is tired. Brian is judging someone. Stewie is performing himself. Meg is being ignored. The drunken clam is open. The theme song is still a doorway. Family Guy is not a calm show. It's violent, noisy, mean, often proudly tasteless, but sleep content ain't always about gentle material. Sometimes it's about stable material. A storm outside can be soothing if the room you're in feels safe. Family Guy is a storm inside a very stable room. That's why, to me at least, Family Guy became improbably like room tone. Room tone is what makes a space feel continuous. It's the low sound underneath everything else, the thing you only notice when it disappears. For millions of people, the Griffin house became that. You know, not always loved, not always actively watched, but present, familiar, available. The show stayed still. The viewers moved. You remember watching an early episode of The Wrong Age, right? You remember laughing at something you didn't understand. You remember seeing a clip later and realizing the joke was worse than you thought, or better, or sadder, or emptier. The show stayed still. You moved. It's like that one Jacksepticeye quote, saying something along the lines of like, you miss of who you were when you watched their videos, like back then. It's not that they changed, you did. If you know what, from that one Anthony Padilla podcast episode, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Everything in the series points back to the same movement: leave, break, offend, wander, contradict, and return. Family Guy is often discussed as if its main unit is the joke. The jokes are loud, the cutaways announce themselves, the offensive lines attract attention, the chicken fights get clipped. Peter hurting his knee became a ritual because the joke refuses to end at the exact moment a normal show should have fracking cut away. The real unit of Family Guy isn't the joke, it's the return. A cutaway only works because the show comes back. The scene begins in the kitchen or the living room with a car. Someone says a phrase that opens a trap door. The episode drops into a memory, a celebrity parody, an imagined past, a fake commercial, a movie reference, an impossible little world. Then the trap door closes. The characters are still there. The conversation continues. The joke lives in the departure, but the form lives in the return. Without the return, Family Guy is a sketch comedy. With the return, it's a sitcom with a trapdoor built into the floor. The same movement happens at every scale. Peter leaves ordinary life for some insane occupation, obsession, grudge, or misunderstanding. He comes back. Brian leaves the role of family dog to become a writer, lover, activist, fraud, father, failure, or martyr. He comes back. Stewie leaves infancy through fantasy, time travel, multiverse travel, therapy, villainy, and theatrical self-invention. He comes back. Even death becomes a departure that must be corrected if it threatens the structure too deeply. Brian's death made that rule visible. Back to the Pilot made it historical. The Simpsons guy made it comparative. Emmy-winning episode made it institutional. Send in Stewie Please made it psychological. Streaming it made it practical. Over and over, the show has tested how far it can travel from the Griffin house before the house has to pull it back. The Griffin home is the device that allows the show to be reckless. If the house were not stable, the chaos would dissolve in noise. It wouldn't mean anything. If Lois were not in the kitchen, Peter would not be funny in the same way. If Brian were not near the couch, Stewie would not have the same counterweight there. If Meg had somewhere better to go, the cruelty toward her would become impossible to ignore. If Chris became too aware, his innocence would stop functioning. The house holds everyone in position. And yeah, no, that position isn't always kind. Meg's place in the family is stable, and that stability is part of the joke and part of the wound. Brian's failure is stable. Quagmire's worst traits are stable until they changed that. Peter's inability to learn is stable. The show preserves things that maybe should have changed. Again, Quagmire's kind of dead. That is the weakness inside the paradox. The same refusal to change that makes Quahog available also makes Quahog morally trapped. The whole story is a long argument between chaos and home. That is why Family Guy can be watched casually and argued about seriously. On the surface, it's a machine for jokes, kind of like Phineas and Ferb and like following the same formula. Underneath, it is a machine for preserving a household against consequence. Family Guy does not accidentally reset. Reset is the thesis. It's a frickin' cartoon. The show began as Seth MacFarlane's strange, fast, Rhode Island-inflected answer to the animated family sitcom. It was young and loud and imprecise. It was canceled. It returned because the audience kept it alive after the network moved on. It became bigger, cruder, more competent, more chaotic. It offended people. It won people back. It lost people. It became a punchline. It became an institution despite itself. Still, after all of that, the most important image is simple. The television is on. Peter's on the couch, Lois is nearby, Meg is being ignored somewhere in the room, Chris is half listening, Brian has a drink, Stewie has a plan. Outside, Quahog is waiting for the next disaster. Inside, the family is already back where it belongs. The final truth about Family Guy is that it's less anarchaic than it appears. Its surface is anarchaic, its jokes anarchaic, its ethics often anarchaic, but its structure is conservative in the deepest formal sense. It preserves, it restores, it keeps the same people in the same house having variations of the same argument forever. People watch because the show offers a form of continuity that real life does not. Nobody ages, nobody leaves for good, the house survives, the door opens, and the episode begins again. For a show so obsessed with interruption, Family Guy's deepest promise is continuity. For a show so proud of not caring, its deepest trick is that it made people care anyway. For a show that insists nothing matters, it spent 24 seasons proving that return matters, that it can care when it wants to. That is the Quahog paradox. The world can dissolve outside the green door. The show can offend, wander, contradict itself, disappear, come back, even age, deny that it's aging, and keep going long after the culture around it has changed. But inside the house, the emotional geometry holds. Peter will misunderstand something, Lois will say his name, Brian will look tired, Stewie will be planning something impossible and he'll do it anyway, Meg will notice more than anyone gives her credit for, Chris will be gentle, and every so often the show will remember to honor that. The television will stay on. The show is not ended because the house has not fallen. And the house hasn't fallen because someone keeps coming home. Alrighty guys, that's the end of this one. I hope that you sleep well if you haven't slept already. Clearly I need some sleep. If you enjoyed the video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all on the next one. Night-night.